Well, good morning, CMC.
Good morning.
It's good to see each one of you. And I do want to wish all the fathers a happy Father's Day. And then for everybody, happy first day of summer. Officially today, first day. For those of you that like it hot, for those of you who like the dog days of summer, that would not include me. About anything over 80 is a little hot for me. But we wish you a happy summer. And this is what everybody was waiting for that was complaining in the spring about how cold it was. And how wet it was. But here we are. So it's great to see everybody today. And I believe I have a message to speak to you because the Lord has spoken to me. And if that doesn't happen, I'm just sermonizing. That's it. But I have a message. It's a kind of a message, and by the way, it's a little longer. I think I spoke for 35 minutes, so if you don't have to look at your clocks or the clock on the wall, it'll be about 35, okay? And but it's kind of where I'm at on my spiritual journey, and we're all at different places. We're all experiencing some different things, and one of the great things about no longer being a pastor that has to prepare a message every Sunday, which is pretty tough to do, is you can spread out things a little bit longer and a little farther, and you can study things a little more detail than what you did, and you don't have to experience sometimes the time deadlines that at times can be kind of stressful. So I just want to share with you today, I want to start, you should have received a paper as you came in. It's an outline of the message, From the Pit to the Palace. You should have received that. It has some blanks for you to fill in, and it will help you keep up with me. It'll give you a fighter's chance. Without it, you got no chance. I'm just going to be honest with you. Without looking at that paper, and I may not get through all of it, but I just want to share some things with you. It was January the 18th of 2010. There was a man from Chicago, and his name was Bill Fong. Bill Fong. Bill was described as an amateur bowler. He was not a professional. He was an amateur. But he took being an amateur to a much higher level than I would say. I'm a very amateur bowler. He would be at the top level of being an amateur. Because Bill, what he did was he would he bowled in 4 different leagues. And he would bowl, on the average, about 20 games a week. All right? So, one night, he is bowling with his team in this league, and his first game, he bowled 12 consecutive strikes. Now, you bowl 12 consecutive strikes, you've bowled a 300 game, that's perfection. You can't do any better than that. But you see, when you bowl in a league, you bowl 3 games in a series. So he still had 2 more games. And everyone was wondering, well, what's he going to do now? He's bowled a 300, and they were glad to witness it, but where does he go from here? So he goes to the second game, and he bowls 12 more strikes. He has a 600 score after 2 games. Perfect 2 games. Well, now the pressure's really on, because now he has a chance to bowl a 900 series in 3 games. It had only been reported having happened 21 times in the history of bowling. He had a shot. So he goes into that third game, and his first 9 balls, all strikes. He has bowled 33 consecutive strikes. We can only dream about that. He goes for his 34th ball, his 34th strike, and all of a sudden, something kind of changes. He's not feeling very good. He starts to sweat profusely, and he starts getting dizzy. But by now, there have been people that have heard that he's got a chance for a 900 series, and so they're coming from other alleys in the bowling alley, and they're cheering him on. Number 34, he puts the ball up against his chest. He takes his customary 5 steps approach. He lets it go. Strike. 34 consecutive strikes. He's got 2 more strikes to get to have a perfect 900 series. He gets the 35th ball. He takes his 5-step approach. He's feeling really rotten at this point. But he didn't want to disappoint the crowd, and he didn't want to give up on the chance of a perfect 900 score. He let it go. The ball goes down the alley. It curved right into the pocket, and all 10 pins went down. 35 consecutive strikes. But he's got to get one more. The crowd is cheering. They're almost losing their minds over this. They are seeing history being made, or possibly being made, and they're cheering him like crazy. He walks up there feeling just awful. He lets it go as the crowd cheers. As the ball's going down the alley, it curves right into the pocket. It looks like it was the exact ball that the other 35 were. And it hits that pocket. 9 pins go down. The 10th pin, which was the 10 pin, which is a hard one to get if you bowl. That's the toughest one usually to take out. The 10 pin wobbled. It wobbled. It looked like it was going to fall over, and then it straightened itself up. Bill Fong ended up with a score of 899 out of 900. I mean, I'd take that any series any day, but he was so disappointed. He was heartbroken. He put his head down, didn't speak to anybody, walked out of the bowling alley and went home. He got home. He was feeling awful. The first thing he did was he went to the bathroom, and by now the room is spinning because he's so dizzy, and he vomits. He's feeling so awful, he thought, I better just go to bed. He goes to bed, he sleeps through the night, he gets up in the morning, and he's feeling worse. He heads to the hospital, into the emergency. And they took all kinds of tests on him. They said, Bill, you have a serious, serious heart condition. It's going to require emergency heart surgery for you. The survival rate for the surgery for you is about 30%. Bill was 46 years old. And he said, I'll take the chance. He had the surgery. The surgery was successful. Bill was put in the recovery room following the surgery. And 2 of the doctors who had worked on him came into the recovery room. And they said, Bill, there's a question that we forgot to ask you. What were you doing when you had your stroke? He had a stroke. And he went on to explain to them his bowling adventure that night in great detail. The 2 doctors who had just sat there and they were just listening, they hadn't said anything to him. They were just listening to his story. They put their heads together. And one of the doctors said, Bill, it's a good thing that you bowled an 899 and that you had the 10-pin wobble rather than bowl a 900. Had you bowled a 900, your blood pressure in celebration would have gone to a level that would have killed you immediately. You see, what Bill experienced that night was what he thought was bad worked out for good for him. 99 and a 10-pin wobble saved his life. I want to talk to you a little bit about who determines what's good and who determines what's bad in our life. I'm going to ask you to turn to Romans chapter 8, verse 28. A very well-known verse, one of the best-loved promises in the entire Bible. Romans 8:28. Dr. R.A. Torrey used to call it a soft pillow for a weary heart. I like that. A soft pillow for a weary heart. It's a great promise. But even though it's one of the best loved verses in the entire Bible by a lot of people, I believe it's one of the most misinterpreted and one of the most misunderstood verses in the entire Bible. And I hope to clarify some of the confusion that is attached to Romans 8:28 as we look at four different things real quick here. As we think in terms of the promise of Romans 8:28, the NIV says, "And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose." For those of us who grew up with the King James Version, I'm giving you that. It reads a little different than the NIV. "And we know that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are called according to His purpose." That's the promise. That's the promise. Now, what is I'm going to give you a second, the problems. Problems. What are the problems with this that this verse presents? Well, the problems aren't really with the verse itself. The problems are with our understanding and our misunderstanding of the verse, okay? And what the verse is really trying to say. And there's four things that I want to cover real quick. One is the idea of we know. Paul says, and we know, okay? We know. I think most of us, if we were to be truthful, would have to confess maybe we're not at the we know stage. We think, we hope, sometimes we believe that all things work together for good. But do we know? Do we have that confident certainty that Paul had? We have to ask ourselves, I'm not so sure. Okay? We know. It's a very important thing. Next is in all things. In all things. This verse does not say that all things are good. People have translated it that way. They've interpreted it that way. That Paul's saying all things are good. That's not at all what he's saying. Okay? There's a difference between saying all things are good and all things work out for good. There's a difference there, major difference. Everybody understand where I'm going? When Adam sinned in the Garden of Eden, he opened up and ushered in a bunch of stuff that was bad. All right? It wasn't good. Now, when God finished creation, everything was good except He said it's not good for man to be alone. But in Genesis chapter 1, 6 times it says, and God saw that it was good. Just in Genesis chapter 1 alone, 6 times. You get to verse 31, the last verse in the chapter, and it says, and God saw all that He had made, and it was very good. All right. Just changed it a little bit. 6 times. It's good. It's all good. It's very good. Okay. That's the way God left creation. Adam came along, he sinned. And his sin brought a lot of this bad stuff into our world. Sickness is not good. Diabetes, I'm a personal witness to the fact, diabetes is not good. And some of you that are my diabetic brothers and sisters, you understand what I'm saying. Diabetes is not good. Parkinsonian syndrome, which Nancy suffers with and struggles with, it's not good. It's not good. COVID almost took me out. I had a bad case of COVID, ended up in the hospital. Had I not gone to the hospital, I wouldn't be preaching here today. I really believe that. I'd have been gone. COVID. That wasn't good. Cancer's not good. I attended a funeral on Friday for a friend of mine in the ministry. Some of you remember Dave Binkley. Dave preached here Spring Refreshing in 2024. March of 2024, he spoke on the Monday night of Spring Refreshing. About 6 months after Dave spoke here, he was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer of the esophagus. And he died on June 5th. His funeral was on my birthday on Friday. That's how I spent my birthday. But it was a great funeral service. They had a video of Dave. He was interviewed by Remedy FM, the radio station, because Clinton Foppel, who is the manager of that radio station, attended the church that Dave Binkley pastored. So Dave spoke to us in a video. Even though he was dead, he spoke to us about what God taught him through his cancer and the new relationship that God had developed during that stage 4 cancer experience in his life. How he saw God differently and how God showed his care to him through his cancer. Murder's not good. Adultery's not good. Suicide's not good. Child abuse is not good. Child neglect is not good. Tornadoes, hurricanes, earthquakes, they're not good. And you can go on and you could fill in the blank with a lot more stuff that is not good. So this verse is not saying that all things are good. So what is this idea? He's going to work all things for the good. How do we define good? This is the key to the whole verse. How do you define that word good? Because we define it differently than God does. We define good as, well, good health, happiness, solid relationships, money in the bank, gas in our vehicle, food in the refrigerator and freezer, a nice place to live, when the surgery is successful, when your marriage is doing well, when you love your job, when your children are on the honor roll, when you get a great doctor's report. When you see, we define good as when all of our creature comforts line up in a row and everything in our life is pretty convenient. That's good. How many of you understand that's not the way God defines the word good at all? And our definition of good and God's definition of good is usually not the same. And there's where our problem comes in understanding this particular verse. We believe good is a better set of circumstances. That's not how God defines good. And then it says He works for the good. Works for the good. The Greek word that is used there for this works together is synergion. Synergion. We get our English word synergy from that word. Now, if you know what synergy is, synergy Synergy is the combination of many elements to produce a positive result. That's synergy. If you're in sports and you play on a team, synergy is when every player on the team fulfills their role, their own individual role, and you put that together, and when it's all combined and everybody's working together, you can produce a winning team. It's synergy. Synergion, that's what it is. It's right there. Now, this next illustration I'm going to use, it's not a personal illustration to me because I have never done this and I never will. It's an illustration from Randy Alcorn. Some of you have read Randy Alcorn. He says, when I was young, I used to help my mother bake delicious cakes. That's where it's not a personal illustration for me. I've never baked a cake. I've never baked a cookie. And it's not on my bucket list of things to do before I die. Can we just go there? I would prefer to eat your cakes and cookies in moderation. All right. But he said, when I was young, I used to help my mother bake delicious cakes. Before she made a cake, she would lay out each of the ingredients on the kitchen counter. I decided I was going to taste each one of the individual ingredients to a chocolate cake. Think about it. Have you ever tasted baking powder? How about baking soda? The flour was horribly bland, and I won't try to describe a raw egg. Even the semi-sweet chocolate tasted terribly bitter compared to the sweet milk chocolate I was used to eating. To sum it up, almost everything that goes into a cake tastes terrible by itself. The striking thing was that when my mother mixed it all together in the right amount, placed it in an oven, and then laid it out to cool, an amazing thing took place. The cake was delicious. That's a great picture, illustration of things working together to produce something of tremendous value. Now, the next thing I want to look at, the third thing, is the purpose. It's unfortunate that Romans chapter 8, verse 28, many times people memorize Romans 8:28, and there's a disconnect between Romans 8:28 and Romans 8:29. That should not exist. Romans 8:29 explains Romans 8:28. They go together, hand in hand. Okay? Look at verse 29. For those God foreknew, He also predestined to be conformed to the likeness of His Son. I'm going to stop right there. That's the purpose. What is the purpose? To be conformed to the likeness of His Son. God's definition of the word good involves spiritual growth, character development, and eternal purposes. That's how God defines that word good. That's not how we define it. How many of you see that we got a problem here? You see, to God Himself, anything that comes into your life, whether it's good or whether it's bad, if it makes you more like Jesus, it's good. Anything that comes into your life that makes you less like Jesus, that's bad. That's God's definition. That typically isn't ours. We're so into our American way of life and all the creature comforts and all these better set of circumstances. God says, no. My definition of good is your character development, your spiritual growth, the eternal purposes that I have for you. That's good. It's all good. So you have to come up with a different way of thinking and seeing things. Okay. God's main purpose in saving us is to make us more like Jesus. An Old Testament illustration is of Joseph. He is the best illustration in the entire Bible of this Romans 8:28 being worked out. His story is a rather long story. In fact, in the book of Genesis, Joseph's story, more space is given to Joseph than any other character in the book of Genesis, which might surprise you because a lot of times we focus a lot on Abraham, the father of the faith. Joseph has more verses than Abraham, okay? His story is Genesis 37 through 50, with the exception of chapter 38, which is about Judah and Tamar, and we've often wondered why that one fits into Joseph's story, but it's a long story. The story of Joseph basically unfolds in 5 scenes, and you've got the 5 scenes in front of you. The first one is a family feud. A family feud. If you want to turn to Genesis chapter 37, beginning at verse 2. Genesis chapter 37, verse 2. This is the account of Jacob, Joseph, a young man of 17. When you're studying Scripture, always pay special attention to time words. They're very important. When we first pick up the story of Joseph, he's 17, okay? Do we have anybody here 17 years old? We got some... Connor, you 17? Yeah. Joseph is Connor's age, okay? So when you look at Connor today, think Joseph. He was tending the flocks with his brothers, the sons of Bilhah, the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives, and he brought their father a bad report about them. Jacob had 4 wives, okay? He had 4 wives. The 12 sons of Jacob were all born to the same father. They were all born to Jacob, but they were born to 4 different wives. Joseph had 10 half-brothers. Okay? 10. Jacob had 4 wives, and one of the 4 wives was his favorite, Rachel. So if he has a favorite wife, it would not be that difficult for him out of 12 sons to have one of the sons that's his favorite, and that son was Joseph. The favorite out of 12. Okay? Joseph was sent out to check on his brothers who were shepherding flocks, and he brought back a bad report to his dad. Now, I've got 3 brothers. I don't have any sisters, I have 3 brothers. I know how that would have played in my family. I'll tell you how we would have seen Joseph. He's a tattletale. And we would have policed that ourselves, in-house. We'd have taken care of that problem. Some of you laugh because you got brothers. Verse 3, now Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons because he had been born to him in his old age, and he made a richly ornamented robe for him. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. That favoritism that was in the family, giving Joseph a robe, a richly ornamented robe, a special gift to Joseph that the other brothers did not receive. And they saw that favoritism in the family. Children always do. They always see it. When you get down to verse 8, his brother said to him, do you intend to reign over us? Let me tell you what's going on there. Joseph has 2 dreams. And he tells his brothers, I've had 2 dreams. Let me tell you about my dream. So he tells them the first one. To summarize it, someday you're all going to bow down to me. Now, I know how that would have played in my family. If a brother of mine says, someday you're going to bow to me. Yeah, right. But he did it again. He had a second dream, and he calls him in again. He says, hey, by the way, I had another dream. And this, you're all going to bow to me. And by the way, Dad and Mom are going to bow to me too. What? They hated him for his dreams. They said, that's never going to happen. By the way, before this story is over, 4 times his brothers bowed to him. 4 times. Later on. Joseph was caught in the middle between his father and his brothers. Joseph proves you can come from a crazy, mixed-up family and do amazing things for the Lord. So if you come from a crazy, mixed-up family, there's still hope for you. With what God can do with your life, there's still hope for you. So you had the family feud. So the father, Jacob, sends Joseph out to go check on his brothers again, why he would do it a second time when the first time didn't end so well. And Joseph, once again, the brothers see him coming. He's gone to Shechem, and then he's gone 13 miles farther to Dothan. The whole trip, he's traveled 63 miles to visit his brothers and see how they're doing. They see him coming from a distance. Here comes the dreamer. Here comes that dreamer. And the first thing they do, they strip him of that richly ornamented robe, and they throw him in a cistern, in a pit. And they leave him there, and then they go and eat lunch. Talk about being callous. He's no doubt shouting to him about, get me out of here. He's yelling, and they're just eating lunch. About the time they're eating lunch, along comes a caravan. It's called Midianites, it's called Ishmaelites, it's the same group. And they're heading to Egypt. So the brothers sell Joseph to that caravan for the price of a slave. And they take Joseph to Egypt. When he gets to Egypt, he's put on the auction block, and a man by the name of Potiphar, who's captain of the armed guard, he purchases Joseph to be his slave. He puts him in charge. Look at chapter 39. Chapter 39, verse 2. The Lord was with Joseph, and he prospered, and he lived in the house of this Egyptian master. When his master saw that the Lord was with him, that the Lord gave him success in everything he did, Joseph found favor in his eyes and became his attendant. Potiphar put him in charge of his household, and he entrusted to his care everything he owned. Verse 6, so he left in Joseph's care everything he had. With Joseph in charge, he did not concern himself with anything except for the food he ate. Joseph was put in a leadership position, a management position, which will come in later in this story. Very important you see this. Because Joseph, he wasn't a leader at the age of 17. He wasn't a leader of anything. Now he's being trained to be a manager, to be a leader. Verse 7, the end of verse 6. Now Joseph was well built and handsome, and after a while his master's wife took notice of Joseph and said, come to bed with me. I would call that the rather direct approach. I don't know how you could express it any more direct than that. Come to bed with me. Verse 11, one day Joseph went into the house to attend to his duties, and none of the household servants was inside. Not a single servant was inside that house. Potiphar's house, it was an obvious setup by Mrs. Potiphar. Okay? We don't know her name, so I'll call her Mrs. Potiphar. She caught him by his cloak and said, come to bed with me. My goodness. But he left his cloak in her hand and ran out of the house. Friends, Joseph lost his cloak, but he kept his character. And you can replace a cloak. And he ran out. Then we have the scene 2, false accusation by Potiphar's wife. She accuses Joseph of attempted rape. And the circumstantial evidence that she had was that robe, that cloak. She had that in her hand. And then it was simply her voice against Joseph's voice And who would Potiphar believe? Well, he took his wife's side. He puts Joseph in prison. Puts him in prison. But we get to verse 20, the end of verse 20. But while Joseph was there in the prison, the Lord was with him. By the way, we have 4 times in the 39th chapter that talk about the Lord was with Joseph. The Lord was with Joseph. And by the way, if we did not have that phrase, the Lord was with Joseph, this story would read entirely different. That is what makes this whole story go in the direction that it goes. The Lord was with Joseph. He showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden. So the warden put Joseph in charge of all those held in the prison. There you have another leadership management position that Joseph is receiving. He was made responsible for all that was done there. The warden paid no attention to anything under Joseph's care because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in whatever he did. Now, lest you think it was all a picnic for Joseph, let me read you something about what happened to Joseph when he went to the prison. In Psalm chapter 105, verse 18, the psalmist tells us this about this situation. They bruised his feet with shackles, his neck was put in irons. You probably never heard that part of this story. That's how he was treated when he first went into that prison. But then the prison warden put him in charge of all the other prisoners. Another management leadership position. We get to chapter 40. We have the story of the baker and the cupbearer. These are 2 men that served Pharaoh. And they get assigned to the prison that Joseph is overseeing now. One night they both have a dream. And Joseph looks at him and says, why are you so downcast? Why are you so discouraged? And they said, well, we've had dreams and no one's able to interpret them. And he says, interpretation of dreams belongs to the Lord. I'll tell you what your dream means. And so he interpreted their 2 dreams. And he said to the cupbearer, in 3 days, you're going to be restored to your position in the palace as a cupbearer. And he said to the baker, in 3 days, you're going to be hung. You're going to be hung. Wow. And he said to the cupbearer, when you get out in 3 days, would you speak a kind word of me to the Pharaoh? Would you let him know about my case? And the cupbearer says, sure. When I get out, I'll tell Pharaoh about you and the fact that you were, innocent. I'll tell him about it. If you look at the end of verse 40, chapter 40, the chief cupbearer, however, did not remember Joseph. He forgot him. So we have scene 3 is a forgotten friend, a forgetful friend. Forgot him. When chapter 41 begins, it says, when 2 full years had passed, this friend forgot Joseph for 2 full years. When he said he was going to speak a kind word to Pharaoh. It's been 2 years, 2 full years. It's interesting the adjective that's used there. Full. 2 full years. So it so happens Pharaoh has 2 dreams, which basically were the same. The interpretation of the dreams is basically the same. He calls in Joseph because at that point the cupbearer remembers Joseph after 2 years and said, there's somebody in the prison who interpreted some dreams for me, and they turned out to be true. He could probably interpret the dream for you. Calls Joseph in. Joseph interprets the dream, obviously with God's help, interprets the dreams, and basically says what's going to happen is your dream means there's going to be 7 years of abundance in Egypt, and then it's going to be followed by 7 years of famine. So what you want to do is you want to take the 7 years of abundance, set 1/5 of the food back from those years so that you have food so that you don't starve during the famine. And Pharaoh looks at Joseph and he says, Who in the kingdom could we get for this job? And he looks at Joseph, he says, I don't know of anybody in the kingdom wiser than you. You got the job. You got the job. Now, he went, folks, from a pit to a prison to a palace, and now Pharaoh says, you're going to be second in the entire kingdom to me. From the pit to the prison to the palace to being prime minister. He went from being a prisoner to prime minister in one day. Not bad for a Hebrew slave. We know from chapter 46, verse 6. Excuse me, I've got a wrong reference here. We know that verse 46 of chapter 41, 46 of chapter 41. Joseph was 30 years old when he entered the service of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. That's significant. When he first came on the scene, he was how old? 17. Now he's 30. So for 13 years of his life, he's been going through a lot of stuff. All right? He had to go through all of that stuff for God to position him in the place where God had the plan and the purpose for his life, to be in the palace. And scene 5, we have a family reunion. Genesis chapter 46. This family reunion. Joseph is now 39 years old. He has not seen his family in 22 years. He's 39. He recognizes them. They don't recognize him. Okay? His family will travel from Canaan to Egypt. It's a trip of about 275 miles. And once he reveals himself to his family, they're invited to come and live in Egypt. And 70 of Joseph's family members make the trip from Canaan and reside in a land that was given to their family, the land of Goshen. All right? Family reunion. Well, we've looked at the promise, we've looked at the problems, we've looked at the purpose. Let me look at the perspective. This is the key to the whole thing. The perspective. In Genesis chapter 45, verse 6, it says, "For 2 years now there has been famine in the land, and for the next 5 years there will not be plowing and reaping. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve to you a remnant on earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So then it was not you who sent me here, but God." You talk about a perspective. Who put him in the pit? Who put him in the dungeon? That was his brothers. Joseph said, no. I see over all of that. It wasn't even you that sent me to Egypt. God sent me to Egypt so that I could save people, so that you and everybody else wouldn't starve. Wow, what a perspective. How many of you know the Christian life is about getting a perspective? And sometimes it's hard to do that. It's hard to see the big picture sometimes. It's hard to see that. In chapter 50, verse 20, this is the Romans 8:28 of the Old Testament. All right? We've come all the way around now. This is the Romans 8:28 of the Old Testament. This is one of my wife's favorite verses. "You intended to harm me," he said this to his brothers, "but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." Let me say it this way to close. At just the right moment, his brothers threw him into the pit. At just the right moment, the Midianite merchants came along. At just the right moment, Joseph was sold to Potiphar in Egypt. At just the right moment, Potiphar's wife falsely accused him. At just the right moment, he met the baker and the cupbearer. At just the right moment, the cupbearer remembered Joseph. At just the right moment, Pharaoh called for Joseph. At just the right moment, he was promoted to prime minister. At just the right moment, Jacob sent his sons to Egypt. At just the right moment, the brothers met Joseph. At just the right moment, Jacob's family traveled to and moved to Egypt. At just the right moment, Pharaoh offered them the land of Goshen. At just the right moment, they settled there and they prospered. Do you see how God was orchestrating all of this stuff, all these leadership positions for Joseph to prepare him to be prime minister over Egypt? It started in Potiphar's house. It went to the prison, and now he's prime minister. The God of Joseph is our God too. He hasn't changed. The God who orchestrated the events of Joseph's life still reigns on the throne and orchestrates the details of our lives. And you can trust Him with the details of your life, because Nancy and I are finding this out. Even though sometimes things are tough, God doesn't make mistakes. Unlike us, He doesn't make mistakes. And when you cannot trace His hand, you can always trust His heart. You can always trust His heart. Let me pray. Father God, we thank You for Romans 8:28. What a powerful promise from Your Word. It seems like we went into it in pretty good detail today, but there are depths of that verse, Lord, which we probably never will explore. Thank You for the way that You just led Joseph from where he was to where You wanted him to be. Joseph's good, but most of all for Your glory. And Father, would You do the same thing in our lives? We're not always going to be able to understand You. At times it's going to be difficult to trust You, as I'm sure it was in Joseph's life. Because Your ways are not our ways, and Your thoughts are not our thoughts. For as high as the heavens are above the earth, so are Your ways higher than ours, and Your thoughts higher than ours, Lord. And we just see through a glass darkly. We see but a poor reflection in a mirror, as we're told in 1 Corinthians 13. We know in part. But Father God, help us to have faith in the part that we do know. In Jesus' name, amen.